Carl Weathers as Hampton Forbes. In the final seasons of In the Heat of the Night, Carl Weathers brought a powerful new presence to the series in his role as Police Chief Hampton Forbes. Stepping into the shadow of an untouchable icon was never easy. Yet with his calm authority and integrity reflected in every glance, he won audiences over completely. Hampton Forbes was more than a lawman. He became proof of Carl's remarkable transformation from a muscle-bound action star into a true dramatic actor with striking emotional depth. Few knew, however, how much hardship Carl had endured just to stand beneath the spotlight. Born into poverty in New Orleans, he was forced to work exhausting manual jobs from a young age, on riverbanks and construction sites, taking on whatever labor he could to help his family survive. As he grew older, American football seemed like his escape, only for that dream to collapse when his contract was abruptly terminated. The physical toll reached its peak in 1988, when he suffered a fractured neck. Even with a severely damaged spine, Carl clenched his teeth and carried on, quietly concealing a life-threatening injury to keep performing, sacrificing his health for roles that would endure on screen. As resilient as he appeared on set, Carl's private life was marked by deep emotional instability. Behind the imposing physique was the pain of a man unable to hold his family together, watching 3 marriages fall apart despite his best efforts. No amount of Hollywood glory could fill the emptiness left by the absence of a lasting home, leaving him isolated amid walls of fame. In his later years, old injuries began to rebel, his body racked by chronic pain from the neck fracture and the relentless wear of age-related illness. The once commanding police chief now battled each day in silence, hiding a failing body beneath crisp uniforms, fulfilling his commitment to his craft until his final breath. The journey of a legend came to a quiet end on February 1st, 2024, when Carl Weathers passed away peacefully in his sleep at home from atherosclerotic heart disease. His sudden departure at the age of 76 left a vast emptiness in the hearts of fans around the world. Though he left this life in calm repose, the legacy of his resilience, of an artist who used the fractures of his own body to illuminate justice, will live on forever in the memory of audiences. Carroll O'Connor as Bill Gillespie. In the classic series In the Heat of the Night, Carroll O'Connor was the irreplaceable soul of the show in his portrayal of Police Chief Bill Gillespie. With his commanding presence and sharp, authoritative eyes, he shaped the image of a principled, old-school lawman, the steady guardian of justice in the town of Sparta. The role not only earned him a prestigious Emmy Award, but also turned Carroll into a cultural icon, a kind of spiritual father to millions of television viewers throughout the 1980s.
Maybe you can one of these days, when this honeymoon is over. Well, I'm going to make this a real honeymoon.
Behind the spotlight and thunderous applause, however, Carroll's life became a breathless chase with the ghosts of his past. After years of heartbreak caused by infertility, adopting young Hugh felt like a miracle that saved his soul. Yet in a fateful decision, he gave the child the name of his younger brother, who had died tragically, unknowingly turning his son into a living stand-in for a lost spirit. The true tragedy began in 1978, when cancer struck his 16-year-old son. In a desperate attempt to ease Hugh's unbearable pain, Carroll watched helplessly as his child slipped into the abyss of addiction, marking the beginning of a 16-year journey defined by tears, hope, and crushing powerlessness. All hope of salvation shattered on March 28, 1995, a blood-stained day forever marked by regret. Carroll felt his heart stop as he listened to his son's final words over the phone, only to hear a gunshot seconds later that ended every effort a father could make. The image of the once unyielding police chief collapsing and screaming his son's name beside the bloodshed became a fatal blow from which he never truly recovered. The years that followed were a living hell. Courtroom battles against the man who supplied drugs to his son, public humiliation, and a body ravaged by illness. Complications from diabetes forced multiple amputations, reducing the on-screen hero to a lonely, broken figure, haunted by the knowledge that he had defeated countless villains in fiction, yet lost the most important battle of his life, saving his only beloved child.
Oh, hi. Am I in the way?
No, Virgil, come on in. I want you to say hello to Lamb.
Carroll O'Connor passed away on June 21, 2001, leaving behind an immense void on screen and in the hearts of fans worldwide. He left more than legendary performances. He left a searing lesson in fatherhood tested by relentless storms.
Hi, Phil. Hello, Martha. How are you? D over here. Merry Christmas, D.
Merry Christmas, Chief.
Though his life closed amid mourning and quiet remembrance, the name Carroll O'Connor will endure as a towering icon and as a man who lived and loved with every shattered piece of his heart. Carroll O'Connor's life has come to an end, yet one fierce debate remains unresolved. Was the death of the two men named Hugh O'Connor, the uncle who died at 27 and the nephew who took his own life at 32, a cruel medical coincidence, or the price of naming a child after someone already gone? Some believe it was a curse of the name, a fate sealed from the moment the name was given. Others insist it was nothing more than the tragic consequences of addiction and cancer. And you, do you believe in destiny or in harsh reality? Share your thoughts below. The truth may lie in the way you choose to see it. Hugh O'Connor as Lonnie Jameson. In the acclaimed series In the Heat of the Night, Hugh O'Connor brought Lonnie Jameson to life, a young police officer with a gentle face, steadfast eyes, and a burning sense of duty that made audiences feel instantly at ease. In the glow of his early 20s, he embodied a rare balance of integrity and warmth, soon becoming a kind of all-American son, cherished by millions of viewers. The role did more than showcase his talent. It became a shared family memory for an entire generation. Yet behind that reassuring smile lay a wound that began at birth.
A few beers, just having some laughs.
Stealing a few watermelons, too, huh?
Born in Rome in 1962, Hugh was the child of a struggling romance between a waiter and a young Italian woman. Unable to raise him, they relinquished their 6-day-old baby, placing him in the care of superstar Carroll O'Connor. Fate dealt another cruel turn when Hugh was named after an uncle who had died tragically in 1961, burdening him with the unspoken pressure to live for someone already lost. Throughout the 1970s, a lingering sense of displacement, combined with suffocating expectations, quietly fractured his spirit, drawing him into a deep, persistent sadness. Those inner conflicts ultimately led Hugh toward a devastating final chapter. The true tragedy erupted in 1978 when cancer struck and painkillers became a necessity, opening the door to a dependency that would last 16 years. This was his most merciless period. Even at the height of his career in the early 1990s, dozens of attempts at recovery failed. On March 28, 1995, his third wedding anniversary, consumed by despair and overwhelmed by what he called the monster of addiction, Hugh phoned his father to say goodbye. A gunshot inside his home ended all hope, leaving a shattered father and a young child behind. On screen, he stood for justice. In life, he departed in a loneliness that is hard to bear.
Well, that ain't quite the problem. You tore up his field.
Hugh O'Connor passed away on March 28, 1995, at just 32 years old. He left quietly, carrying with him unanswered questions about his origins and years spent in darkness. And yet, his legacy endures. Through In the Heat of the Night, Hugh remains a sacred memory, a kind, familiar face audiences still hold close to their hearts, even as his life was marked by tragedy from its very first day. Howard Rollins as Virgil Tibbs. In the history of American television, Howard Rollins's portrayal of Virgil Tibbs stands as a symbol of intellect and unwavering resolve. With his refined demeanor, calm authority, and razor-sharp reasoning, Howard created a perfect counterbalance to Police Chief Gillespie. The role not only carried him to the height of fame and earned the admiration of millions, but also became a source of pride for the black acting community, affirming his stature as a true acting prodigy.
People go to jail for lots of sillier things than this. I mean, I've seen it more than once.
Yet behind those steady eyes lay a soul battered by relentless storms. From a young age, Howard endured the harsh reality of racial discrimination, forced into grueling labor under constant humiliation as he fought his way toward Hollywood. When success finally arrived, the crushing demand for perfection pushed him into the abyss of addiction throughout the 1980s and 1990s. There were long nights of wandering in solitude, followed by brutal awakenings, arrests and handcuffs placed on the very hands that portrayed a principled inspector on screen. His once brilliant career began to fracture as substance abuse slowly seized control of his judgment. The tragedy reached its lowest point when Howard was devastated by the discovery that he was living with AIDS. The diagnosis did more than destroy his immune system. It shattered an already fragile spirit. His body deteriorated to the point of distortion. The once strong shoulders withered into frailty, forcing him to retreat from the camera in quiet shame. Bitterly, amid the searing pain of illness, Howard faced it all alone. With no spouse, no children, and no family at his side, he withdrew into dark rooms, bearing the anguish of a hero abandoned by the world.
Well, you won't mind sharing it for a while, now will you?
That isolation became a second poison, draining the last traces of hope from a man once celebrated across Hollywood. Howard Rollins's tear-stained journey came to an end on December 8, 1996, at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital. He passed away from severe pneumonia related to AIDS at just 46 years old, in a silence that felt chilling. Though he departed carrying regrets and unspoken pain, the proud image of Inspector Virgil Tibbs endures, a lasting reminder of a brilliant talent who burned fiercely before fading into the shadows. Lois Nettleton as Joanne St. John. In the world of In the Heat of the Night, Lois Nettleton portrayed Joanne St. John with an elegance that carried a quiet sorrow beneath its grace. A seasoned actress who once shone brightly on the Broadway stage, she brought a refined, deeply controlled intensity to the role, allowing Joanne to be more than a woman standing beside Chief Gillespie, but a symbol of sacrifice and quiet pride. This performance became one of the most delicate lyrical notes in a career that spanned more than half a century. Behind the polished, aristocratic image on screen, however, lived a Lois Nettleton with a fractured spirit, shaped by a childhood marked by emotional coldness. The tragedy began early, when her parents divorced, a devastating shock in the rigid social climate of the 1930s. Her father walked away and severed all contact, offering neither affection nor support, leaving her to grow up under the harsh detachment of a demanding mother. The feeling of being discarded by the most important man in her life planted lifelong insecurity and doubt about her own worth. Those loveless early years, compounded by the trauma of a severe car accident, left her withdrawn and fragile, turning acting into the only refuge where she could escape a reality soaked in quiet pain. Cruelly, success on screen could never fill the vast emptiness of her private life. After her only marriage ended in the 1960s, Lois chose a reclusive path. No children, no remarriage, and a life lived largely in solitude. As her career entered its twilight, she was stunned to learn she was suffering from aggressive lung cancer. Guided by fierce dignity, she kept her illness secret, enduring the searing pain alone as old injuries from the accident merged with the relentless toll of the disease. In her final months, the gifted actress faced profound loneliness inside a sterile hospital room, without the comfort of close family, surrounded only by fading memories of a brilliant past. The journey of a legend came to an end on January 18, 2008 in Los Angeles, due to complications from lung cancer. She was 80 years old. Lois Nettleton departed as she had lived, quietly, without spectacle, yet leaving behind a deep, lingering sadness. Audiences will always remember her as a beautiful but solitary flower, an artist who transformed the wounds of her own life into unforgettable performances that continue to touch millions of hearts. Fran Bennett as Ruda Gibson. In a cinematic world crowded with dazzling beauty, Fran Bennett stood like an unmovable mountain in her role as Ruda Gibson. She carried an air of authority, a steel-edged voice, and piercing eyes that commanded instant respect. Audiences remembered her as a distinguished university professor and a seasoned actress who dominated every frame she entered, yet few knew that behind that granite-hard exterior lay a heart marked by bleeding wounds, a life in which every step forward was paid for with bitter tears and profound solitude. Her tragedy began in the 1930s, in sun-scorched yet unforgiving Arkansas. Under the shadow of the Jim Crow laws, Fran's childhood knew no dolls or praise, only the sting of prejudice. The gifted young girl often stood quietly outside an old theater, its moss-covered brick walls bearing witness to her longing to touch art, only to be met with cold rejection from children her own age. The cruelest chapter came in the mid-1960s, as America roiled with civil rights upheaval. At that time, Fran was alone in glittering yet indifferent New York, struggling to build a life. One freezing night in 1964, a hurried telegram delivered the news of her father's death. Trapped by poverty and the barriers of the era, she could not return in time to see him one last time, a regret that would haunt her forever. Just a few years later, as mournful jazz drifted through city streets, she lost her beloved mother to sudden illness. To lose both parents in isolation, amid a nation in turmoil, turned Fran into a solitary wanderer, carrying the last warmth of her family deep within her heart. Fate was not finished testing her. In the autumn of 1994, as Hollywood underwent sweeping change, a catastrophic accident struck on a theater stage. Fran fell more than 2 meters onto the unforgiving wooden floor. The fall shattered her spine, and with it, the future she had imagined. In the years that followed, she endured relentless pain, relying on high-dose painkillers just to continue teaching and performing, hiding her injury beneath the commanding presence of Ruda Gibson. By the 2000s, as the stage lights grew dimmer, the image of Fran Bennett in her final years became almost unbearable. In an aging Los Angeles home, surrounded by yellowed black and white photographs of her youth, the once formidable woman lay frail and skeletal, nearly swallowed by medical equipment. Respiratory failure forced her to rely on an oxygen tank even in sleep. In a space heavy with memories of past triumphs, Fran lived out her final days in exhaustion and isolation, each labored breath a final battle for survival by a woman who had given her entire life to art, only to be worn down mercilessly by time. Fran Bennett passed away at the age of 84, as the world itself trembled under the weight of a global pandemic. She departed quietly, like a leaf falling in a winter night, without fanfare, without grand tributes. Her passing left an immense silence, reminding us how deeply we owed this woman a simple, heartfelt thank you. Fran's journey, brutal yet dignified, came to its close. She left to reunite with her parents and brother, finally freed from spinal pain and the burden of oxygen tanks. Though her body has returned to dust, the image of a resolute Ruda Gibson and the compassionate spirit of Fran Bennett will live on in the hearts of audiences forever. Rest now, woman of steel. Your wounds have at last been healed by the enduring love and remembrance of generations to come. Chuck Hicks as Red Jack. In the unforgiving world of cinema, Chuck Hicks stood as an unnamed giant, hidden behind the role of Red Jack. A legendary stuntman with a body forged by iron discipline, he was more than an actor. He was the silent guardian of A-list stardom. Every breathless action sequence, every brutal collision carried the imprint of Chuck's blood and sweat. Yet behind the applause reserved for the characters on screen was a man quietly counting down the final days of a body already shattered beyond repair. Few knew that Chuck Hicks's formidable career was built on fragments of pain. In 1970, during an explosive stunt, a technical failure turned the set into hell. Flames suddenly engulfed him, nearly burning him alive in front of the cameras. Witnesses later said that in those moments, he did not cry out for help. Instead, he instinctively shielded his face, the only true asset of a performer, with his bare hands, while the skin on his back and arms was brutally scorched. Before that agony could fade, fate struck again. A high-risk fall crushed his spine. Doctors studied the results, shook their heads, and declared he would spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Refusing a life sentence confined to a bed, Chuck trained in secret, biting down on unbearable pain to stand again. Because for him, stopping work meant death itself. But defeating paralysis was only the beginning of an even more harrowing chapter. To remain upright before the camera, Chuck relied on heavy painkillers for more than 30 years. That dependence silently ravaged his body, leading to kidney failure and severe liver damage in his later years. Cruelest of all, when his strength was at its lowest, his lifelong wife, the only person who had ever dressed his wounds, passed away. The loss shattered what little resilience he had left. In his final years in Las Vegas, Chuck Hicks lived like a ghost in an empty house. Tormented by illness, brain injury, and delirium, he often woke in the middle of the night, calling out his wife's name, clutching old stunt props as if they were the last companions in a life defined by profound loneliness. All pain and isolation finally ended on May 4th, 2021, when Chuck Hicks passed away at the age of 87. He left this world quietly, just as he had lived, always standing behind others. There was no red carpet, no thunderous eulogies, only the scars etched into his body as the truest testament to a life of silent sacrifice. Audiences will forever remember Red Jack, a fearless warrior who wove cinematic dreams from his own blood and bones, a man who lived and died with pride, even as his heart had long been broken. Ted Manson as Elmer. In the memories of film lovers, Ted Manson appears as Elmer, an elderly man with a face etched by time and eyes of uncommon kindness. Though he appeared only briefly in supporting roles, Ted poured his entire heart into each performance, turning Elmer into a symbol of sincerity and quiet warmth. Audiences cherished his natural, unforced style, yet few knew that behind those peaceful frames lay a storm-tossed life, one in which he carried layer upon layer of tragedy alone until his final days. Ted Manson's fate seemed marked by hardship from the moment he was born in 1928. His childhood was swallowed by the darkness of the Great Depression, when hunger and poverty crept into every corner of life. Instead of attending school, young Ted wandered the streets collecting scraps of leftover bread, surviving in tattered clothes just to make it through each day. And yet, the hunger of youth was still not as cruel as the pain that awaited him in old age. The greatest blow came when he was forced to endure the helpless agony of a father watching his beloved child slowly wither away from a devastating illness he could not cure. During those bleak years, Ted worked himself to exhaustion, his hands hardened by backbreaking labor, clinging to the hope that he might buy his child a few more days of life. Fate, however, showed no mercy. Before the grief of losing his child could heal, another wound followed. In 2008, his wife of nearly 60 years, the one person who had stood beside him through every storm, passed away. That succession of losses shattered what remained of Ted's spirit, plunging him into profound despair and isolation. Cruelty did not stop there. While his heart was still bleeding from bereavement, Ted Manson was sentenced to death by pancreatic cancer. In his final months, the elderly artist no longer carried any trace of vitality, his body reduced to skin and bones, a frail silhouette inside a silent, empty home. Worse still, the illness ravaged his mind, leaving him with severe memory loss. There were mornings when he woke up alone, unable to remember who he was or why his life felt so unbearably empty. Amid poverty and relentless physical pain, people still saw old Elmer struggle back to the set. He clung to acting as if it were his last lifeline, an escape from a reality too bitter to face. The image of a fragile old man, legs trembling, voice faltering, yet determined to finish every line while drifting in and out of illness, became a heartbreaking symbol of devotion. Ted Manson spent his final days deprived of both comfort and affection, fighting death alone until his strength was finally spent. Ted Manson's arduous journey came to an end on January 28, 2008. He passed away just weeks after the loss of his beloved wife, closing a life of hardship and endurance at the age of 80. He departed quietly and in poverty, yet the legacy he left behind endures. Performances rich in humanity and a powerful lesson in resilience. Audiences will always remember a weathered but unbreakable Elmer, a man who gave his final breath to art, seeking solace in the embrace of viewers as a way to forget his own pain before returning to dust. Pat Hingle as Roy Eversol. Within the web of intrigue that defines the series, Pat Hingle embodied Roy Eversol with a presence that was both commanding and weathered. A master of his craft, he needed few words to convey the weight of the character. With his penetrating gaze and resonant gravel-toned voice, Pat held viewers' attention effortlessly, turning Roy Eversol into an indispensable piece of the story and a vital force behind the show's success.
I gave it away years ago to a young lady. She needed it for her personal defense.
Yet beneath that on-screen solidity lay a life shattered by trials far beyond what any one person should bear. Tragically, Pat Hingle's real life was anything but gentle. His hardships began in childhood when he witnessed his parents' divorce, an overwhelming rupture in the early 20th century. Deprived of family warmth, he endured rejection and neglect, spending bitter winter nights sleeping on a porch with nowhere to go, battling hunger and crushing loneliness on his own. Adulthood brought no reprieve. The shadow of war fell heavily upon him. Returning from the Pacific battles of World War II in 1945, Pat carried psychological wounds that never healed. The sound of gunfire and the sight of fallen comrades haunted his sleep, turning each day into an unending internal struggle for peace. The greatest test arrived in 1959, just as his career was reaching a brilliant peak. A horrific elevator accident sent Pat plunging from the 4th floor into the shaft below. The impact devastated his body, shattered pelvis, crushed legs, a mangled wrist, and the permanent loss of a finger. For the next year and a half, he lay immobilized in a hospital bed, bearing dozens of agonizing surgeries after doctors had doubted he would survive at all.
I figured I'd make a few bucks playing poker, but the cards weren't falling for me, so I got out of the game while I still had some money left. Went and bought a few drinks for my friends.
Before the physical pain could fully subside, another blow struck. In 1977, his marriage of more than 2 decades collapsed, leaving him alone amid the wreckage of his life. In his final years, weakened and worn down, he faced a final sentence in the form of leukemia, watching helplessly as relentless pain consumed his strength day by day. All suffering finally ended on January 3, 2009, when Pat Hingle passed away peacefully at home at the age of 84. He departed after a lifelong battle with a cruel fate, leaving profound sorrow among colleagues and fans alike. Pat left behind more than iconic roles such as Commissioner Gordon and Roy Eversol. He left a lesson in courage. He will always be remembered as a true warrior, a man who rose from the ruins of destiny to keep the flame of art alive until his very last breath. Mel Stewart as Calvin Peterson. Turning back the clock to the 1970s and 1980s, when television dramas still carried a soft glow of nostalgia across the small screen, Mel Stewart emerged as a refreshing presence in the role of Calvin Peterson. With his effortless comedic timing and confident charm, he became an unforgettable part of the memories of millions of American viewers. Mel was remembered as a man overflowing with energy, someone who could transform even the most awkward situations into bursts of genuine laughter. Yet behind the bright stage lights and endless applause lived a soul weighed down by wounds that never truly healed. An artist who used the broken pieces of his own life to weave joy for others. Mel Stewart's life seemed destined for hardship from his very first breaths in Cleveland in 1929. His childhood was swallowed by the darkness of the Great Depression, where cramped tenements and gnawing hunger were constant companions. As a boy, Mel often stood quietly before brightly lit shop windows, only to be met with disdain and harsh dismissal because of his poverty and the color of his skin. Worn-out clothes and shoes with holes in their soles carved a deep sense of inferiority into his young spirit, driving him to use humor as a shield to hide the pain of being looked down upon. The true tragedy, however, struck in the early 1960s, when Mel was alone in glamorous yet unforgiving New York, chasing his dreams. One late afternoon in 1962, as mournful jazz drifted from roadside bars, a hurried telegram arrived with news of his father's death. Trapped by poverty and the difficulty of travel at the time, he could not return in time to say goodbye. The image of Mel slumped in a dark rented room, trembling hands clutching that telegram, became a wound that bled quietly for the next 50 years. He lost the one man who had been his anchor, leaving a vast emptiness no later success could ever fill. Fate showed little mercy to the gifted performer. Just as his career reached full bloom, Mel Stewart was confronted with a death sentence in the form of pancreatic cancer. By the early 1990s, audiences began to notice a visibly frailer Calvin Peterson, sunken eyes, labored steps, and a body rapidly losing strength. The cruelest blow came when the disease began to steal his voice, the sharpest weapon and most precious asset of a comedic actor. The helplessness of wanting to speak words of love or deliver final lines, only to produce broken whispers, crushed his spirit. In the final days of February 1992, inside a quiet California hospital, the Mel Stewart who once lit up screens was barely recognizable. Lying small and fragile on a stark white bed, his body reduced to skin and bone, he counted each labored breath through the cold rhythm of life support machines. Surrounded by the sharp scent of antiseptic and fading memories of childhood in Cleveland, Mel spent his final hours in profound solitude. The man who had warmed millions of hearts with laughter now reached the end of his journey in haunting silence, applause still echoing somewhere beyond, while he no longer had the strength to utter a final goodbye. On February 24, 1992, in the lingering chill of a California winter, Mel Stewart took his last breath, closing a turbulent 62-year journey. He departed quietly, like an old film reel reaching its final frame, leaving behind an irreplaceable void in the hearts of colleagues and admirers alike. His passing was neither loud nor dramatic, yet it marked the end of a life devoted entirely, down to the very last drop, to the art of making others smile. Alan Autry as Captain Bubba Skinner. In the memory of In the Heat of the Night fans, Alan Autry stands as Captain Bubba Skinner, a principled, strong man, a steady backbone for justice. With the broad-shouldered build of a former football player and a resolute stare, Alan carved out an on-screen monument that felt unshakable throughout the 1980s and 1990s. But behind that imposing uniform was never a path lined with roses. It was the story of a soul bruised by poverty, wounded by abandonment, and, at one point, nearly lost to the hopelessness of the bottle. Alan's hardship began in the 1950s in rural, struggling Louisiana. While other children were warmed by their parents' arms, Alan watched his family break apart far too early. His biological father left, leaving a vast emptiness inside the boy. He grew up under the name Carlos, his stepfather's surname, like a painful denial of his own roots. The sun-scorched 1960s in California's San Joaquin Valley saw young Alan bent over cotton fields, working himself to the bone, hands cracked and bleeding from picking crops just to help his mother put food on the table. Poverty clung to him even as he reached Hollywood in the late 1970s. After his sports dream collapsed because of injury, Alan arrived in the film capital with nothing but scar tissue on his heart and empty pockets. It's heartbreaking to know that the future star once slept in the back seat of a battered car, survived on dry pieces of bread, and endured the industry's cold indifference. They dismissed him as a muscle guy who can't act, leaving him trapped in relentless unemployment, alone in a city glittering with lights, yet brutal in its lack of mercy. Amid career dead ends and suffocating loneliness, Alan Autry fell into another tragedy: alcohol. Through much of the 1980s, long stretches of drinking turned him into someone he hardly recognized, shattering his first marriage in tears and separating him from his young daughter. That fall left a wound that never fully closed, forcing him to live with self-blame and belated regret. You might think the triumph of Bubba Skinner would have delivered a perfect ending, but time was cruel to him once again. As the 2020s arrived, the damage from old football injuries and years of physical strain on set began to launch a full assault on his body. Alan was no longer the commanding hero. He became a frail old man, walking with tremors under the relentless pain of chronic arthritis. In a quiet home filled with yellowing photographs, he spent his later days in solitude, battling illness and the sorrow of watching former colleagues fade away one by one. The mighty captain the world once knew became a thinning shadow, silently counting down time as the glamorous world moved on without noticing. Yet even in a life scarred by tragedy, Alan Autry stood firm, like an old oak after a storm. He defeated the demon in the bottle, rediscovered faith, and became a devoted servant to his community. The losses of close friends like Howard Rollins and Carroll O'Connor did not break him. They only taught him to cherish every remaining breath. Alan Autry may no longer stand at the peak of fame, but the legacy of a cotton-picking kid who refused to surrender to fate will endure. Remember him not only as a star, but as proof of rebirth after soul-deep pain, a man who spent a lifetime writing a quiet anthem of loyalty and resilience through endless tragedy. The town of Sparta is still there, but our old friends have quietly slipped away after lifetimes shaped by storm and struggle. They gave their entire lives to audiences, leaving us unforgettable performances and memories that time cannot erase, even as their private lives were marked by loss and silent pain. Leave a final farewell and wish these beloved actors peaceful rest as our last gesture of gratitude. And don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue preserving these beautiful memories together.